The numbers are in for the month of April, and the Vancouver real estate market is showing signs of cracking. We had 24% year-over-year drop in terms of sales, and when we look at inventory, we've reached over 16,000 of active inventory, numbers that we haven't seen since 2019. And we've also had those 3 consecutive months of price dropping. But what is quite significant though, despite these record highs in terms of inventory and drops in sales, we haven't seen massive divergence in terms of price points. So we're going to go into all of these charts. We're going to show you exactly what's going on in the Vancouver East, the Vancouver West markets, condos, townhomes, detached. And right now, the Vancouver West detached segment is the best if you're looking for best bang for your buck and most amount of inventory. But we're going to go through all the data here so that you can make an informed decision whether you're looking to buy or sell this year or prepping for next steps in 2025. Buyers have essentially vanished. We know that they are out there. We can see them. I just had an open house this past weekend in Fairview, almost 40 parties through, no offers on the property. We know that they are out there, but they are so tentative. With the Liberals taking ownership of the federal landscape here, that should bring some stability to the marketplace. So it's going to be interesting to watch these charts and the graphs here over the next couple months because we are needing some sort of stability here. So let's jump into the numbers here so you can get all the data that you need to help with your search. I'm going to jump into the April news release from the Greater Vancouver Realtor Board so that you have more of a commentary and an educated look of what's going on in the marketplace in terms of these numbers, as well as what some economists are saying as well. So first and foremost, you're going to see here the slowdown in home sales registered on the multiple listing service in Metro Vancouver that began early this year continued in April, with sales down nearly 24% year over year. And that is significant, and especially when you're pairing it with the amount of inventory. And you can see that from Andrew Leese here, who is the director of economics. He states, from a historical perspective, the slower sales we are now seeing stand out as unusual, particularly against a backdrop of significantly improved borrowing conditions, which typically helps to boost sales. What's also unusual is starting the year with Canada's largest trading partner threatening to tilt our economy into recession via trade policy, while at the same time having Canadians head to the polls to elect a new federal government. These issues have been hard to ignore, and the April home sale figures suggest some buyers have continued to patiently wait out the storm. We are definitely seeing that. There are many buyers out there that are willing and able to transact, but because we don't have that stability out there, it's very tentative. It is very hard to get deals done. It's hard to even get offers to the table. I have listings where we've had people come through 3 times, 3 long showings, people flying out from other markets to view properties, so you know that they're serious and they love the home. There's no really negative feedback, but they just want to wait. That is very common. Wait. When we look at the detached, attached, and apartment properties that are newly listed on the MLS in Metro Vancouver for April 2025, we saw that it represented a 3.4 decrease compared to April 2024, and that's 19.5% above that 10-year seasonal average for the month as well. So we're seeing a lot of these stat lines that are well above the 10-year seasonally adjusted numbers. So that is a pause for concern here, depending on which side of the ledger you are in. But for a buyer, this should be music to your ears. These are all signs as a buyer what you should be looking for. So finally, one more item that I wanted to put together here, and this is a quote here that I wanted to read before we dive into the charts. While the headlines have been filled with worrying news lately, there are positives in the current market worth highlighting, especially for buyers. Inventory levels have just crested 16,000 for the first time since 2019. Prices have stayed fairly stable for the past few months, and borrowing costs are the lowest they've been in years. These factors benefit buyers, and with balanced conditions across the market overall, there's plenty of opportunity for anyone looking to make a purchase. And I completely agree. I mean, these conditions are perfect for a buyer, but for whatever reason, there is no motivation or pressure points pushing buyers into the marketplace. But we also know that these conditions aren't going to last forever. As a buyer, you're going to want to operate in these conditions because you have no pressure. You're going to be usually the only offer. You're going to have advantageous terms. And as things change, and this is what I don't understand, and this is some feedback that I've also had from agents, they say, hey, if you get an offer, let us know, our party's interested. So as a buyer, why are you wanting to wait to see if someone else offers on a property? Why don't you just move forward? Why don't you just put an offer on a property, see if you can come to terms, and if not, no big deal, you cross it off the list and you move on to the next one. But so many times people are either wanting to see interest rates to drop before they enter in the market, or they want to save a little bit more so they can enter the market, or they want to wait a little bit longer. And by that time, you start transacting when everybody else is transacting, and now the little bit of money that you may have saved by being able to have a couple points drop on your mortgage rate, you are now going to have to possibly overpay, or pricing starts to kick up, or the property that you like is a little bit more pressure packed in terms of those scenarios. But with all of this, with these numbers, despite the abnormally high listings and despite the drop in sales, you would think that there would be a critical point here where pricing has really dipped down. And when I bring up these charts here, you're not going to see that. And that's why Vancouver is such an interesting market to operate in, because it can have all these items where it just is poised to have a break, some sort of break downward in terms of pricing. And it hasn't done that. The interest rates haven't done that. COVID has not done that. And as I bring up the charts here, as we go into the Vancouver East numbers, you're going to see that we're going to go over everything here. Green is detached properties, blue are condos, and orange are townhomes here. And what you're going to see here in terms of these markers for a buyer to really focus in on: active listings, you want to see a big plus, and sales you want to be down in the minus. So for example, detached, plus 39% inventory year over year, 11% down in sales. Average days on market is 32% increase as well to 28. So these days on market are not painting the proper picture. I was just in a mastermind yesterday, and in some boards, I believe in Alberta, they have a continuous tracker for days on market. So despite if you terminate it or take it off, they have a running clock. Here, people will take the listing off, relist it, erase that history. I track all of that with my spreadsheets and whatnot, because what I've been seeing is, for almost anywhere from Coquitlam to Vancouver, we're seeing about 200 days on market for active inventory here. Not this, 28 or less than 1 month. It's much, much higher. It's from 150 to 200 days. Things are really, really sitting here. So these ones I don't pay too much attention to, because they're very much affected by how people designate their listings. You have to look at the history to see how things are there. So in terms of pricing, we see that pricing has essentially stayed flat year over year. 1.855 million is your average price point for a detached property. As you roll down to condos here, again, similar to the detached market, we have an increase in inventory, 18%. Sales are down 16%, and pricing is just down 1.3%. So an average condo in Vancouver's east side is sitting at $711,800. And then finally, for the townhouse segment here, not as drastic here. So you can see that obviously, and you're going to see it with these sales to active ratio charts, is going to reflect this, right? So total active listings just up 6%, sales up 3%, and pricing actually up 2% year over year, where your average townhome now is 1.136 million on Vancouver's east side. So on the sales to active ratio chart, this essentially denotes what type of market we are in. So anything above 20%, you are going to be in seller market conditions. 12 to 20 is balance, and anything under that 12% marker, you're in buyer market conditions. So detached here, and this is denoted here with the color coding. So the darker green is seller market, white is balance, and then the light green here is buyers. So detached, actually, you can see that, you look at January of this year, it was the lowest it's been in quite some time. It's starting to jump up into balanced market conditions. We have townhomes actually in seller market conditions at 24.8%, and condos cresting into those seller market conditions at 19%. So the attached market here in Vancouver's east side is not so bad. The detached market is definitely where you would want to be focusing in on that. But what's good to see, especially if you're looking for condos and detached, we have a huge influx of inventory in both of those markets. So as we get into the pricing charts for detached, on average, no change on pricing. 1.854 million is your average. If we look at some of the winners and losers, when we look at the winners, Fraser, that's where I live, Vancouver East, up 7.9%. Knight Street, 7.4%. Those are some of the big dogs here. And then on the opposition side of things, we can see that Fraser View, Vancouver East, not to be mistaken for Fraser, Vancouver East, dropped 6.7%. Hastings down 6%. Mount Pleasant, Vancouver East, down 6.1%. That's pretty surprising. Mount Pleasant, Vancouver East is always quite popular. And Strathcona has also dropped 6.1% in pricing. Strathcona, despite what you may think of the area, is quite a competitive place. A lot of people love those little pockets and communities in there. When we move over to the condos, just of a drop, 1.3%, 702,800, your average benchmark price for condos. And as we look at some of the winners and losers here, we can see in South Vancouver a 5.5% drop in price point. Other than that, there wasn't too much. Vancouver downtown down 4.9%. That's pretty significant in a year. And then if we look at some of the winners, Renfrew Heights, almost 9% increase. So this is another thing with the market. There are going to be some break points. You'll notice that even in some segments, there are multiple offers. Some properties, essentially where you're at, you're either going to move within, the first 10 days, 10 to 14 days, or you're going to be sitting for months on end, and you're going to have to adjust your pricing. There are going to be some break points, but keep in mind with some of these data sets, Renfrew Heights, it says 9%, but if you look on the sales and all that, there was no data here, so 0. So take that for what that may be. And finally, with the townhouse reporting, 2% increase, so the most competitive segment on Vancouver's east side, 1.159 million for your average price point. And when we look at these winners and losers, Strathcona up 8.1% in pricing. Keep in mind that was based off of just one sale here. Mount Pleasant up 4.8%, not surprising, very competitive marketplace in there. People really like living in those spots. And then, we saw a little bit jump up of Renfrew, but again, one sale at 3%. And then if we look at some of the losers, nothing pretty big out here other than these ones in Killarney and Knight with just a 0.9% drop. But again, one sale. You have to look at this with your eyes wide open here. Just 28 sales through all of these sub areas. So we don't have a lot of data points, but you can see active listings 113 for that month of April. And then this is what I was referring to right at the top, and you're going to see it on Vancouver's west side, which we're going to do next. Despite all these challenges, despite being in buyer market conditions, despite having an influx of inventory and sales down, it has not affected pricing really whatsoever. You can actually see in the townhouse segment that we've been starting to jump upward, and we're getting close to pretty much, actually we are at all-time highs. You can see the last point here, 1.157, we just crested that by $2,000. So that's quite interesting. And then you can see, with the condo market, we've essentially been at a flat line, since 2021, 2022. There has been no change really. It's been up and down as a yo-yo. And then on the detached segment, despite it being soft in buyer market conditions, we're still probably, what is this, like the 97th percentile in terms of pricing. We had the high back here in 2022, 1.941. We're at 1.854, around $90,000 difference on average. So we're there. At some point, this is going to break out. We haven't had a nice run up in pricing. I do think we're a little bit of that away, probably 2 to 3 years. We know that the inventory crunch is going to be coming because of the construction drops. Can the Liberals start to baby build like Mark Carney says? Time will tell. But that's what we're seeing on Vancouver's east side. Moving on to Vancouver's west side, things are a little bit softer here, and you can just see that right away with that sales to active ratio in terms of their overall market conditions. But as we go over here, again, green is detached, blue condos, orange is the townhomes. The pricing here on detached up 0.1%. Your average detached on Vancouver's west side 3.447 million. But again, these are these markers as a buyer you're wanting to look for. Inventory change up 21%. Sales down 17%. So that's a great area to be looking in. And actually, the softest out of any segment in Vancouver right now is the west side detached. Condos up in pricing 0.9%. Again, 26% increase in inventory, down 3% in sales. $842,100 is your average price point for a condo. And then on the townhouse side of things, an increase of price point of 0.5%. Your average townhouse on the west side is 1.471 million. Again, pretty big deviation. Increase of 26% in your inventory and down 20% in sales. And we head over to the sales to active ratio here, the detached market, 7.8%, heavy buyer market conditions. This is the softest segment in Vancouver right now. If you've been thinking of wanting to get into the west side, this is your time. If you're looking to upsize, this is definitely your time to do it. It is very, very soft despite the pricing here. You just have a ton of selection. So just because pricing hasn't dropped, there are going to be some opportunities when you have that much inventory. There are reasons why people are wanting to sell. So you're going to be able to get some good value there as well. Townhouses are at 12.9%. So just getting into balanced market conditions, and then condos are firmly planted in balanced market conditions at 15%. So you can see that all three segments here in the sales to active ratio chart here are starting to trend upward a little bit. The detached market has essentially been in buyer market conditions for the bulk of the last remaining year. We've had a big drop down from the peak down in 2023 in terms of the condos, and they're sitting low in balanced market conditions. So as a buyer on Vancouver's west side, a lot of opportunity out there to be able to put a proper deal together for you, and a lot less competitive than Vancouver's east side. So as we get into the detached property report here, again, just the 0.1% increase. If we look at winners and losers, and keep in mind, 668 inventory with just 52 sales, there's not a lot of data to go on. So keep this with a grain of salt. So when we look at winners, South Cambie 9.2%, but again, just one sale. If we look at which sub area had the most action, Cambie, 9 sales, 3.2% increase in pricing. Cambie, very popular area to live in. Anywhere else, let's see, 8 Point Grey, a drop of 0.2%. So pretty much on par. And other than that, the data points don't tell us a lot, but what in terms of the sales, but on active listings, it does tell us a lot. If we look at areas like Shaughnessy, 71 inventory, Dunbar, 85 inventory. These are some of the areas that you're going to want to key in that are going to be very, very soft. And that's what is essentially affecting those buyer market conditions sitting at 7%, because you just have a lot of this inventory here that is active right now. Condos up 0.9%. And when we look at some of the winners and losers here, 10.6% in Shaughnessy, but there's just 3 sales. Where else here? Let's look at downtown. 58 sales, down 1.6%. We know downtown Vancouver West has been hit pretty hard. I would say down 1.6% is a win for a lot of people. I know some people have been losing hundreds of thousands of dollars, especially in those luxury segments, buildings that are just a couple years old. Let's see, 30 in Kitsilano, negligible here, on par, 0% change in price point. So again, 1,952 active inventory, just 292 sales. So again, you're going to have a lot of options out there on the condo side. Finally, townhomes up 0.5%. If we look at some of these numbers here, 38 sales, 295 active. Where are some of the winners and losers here that stand out? Fairview, I have a beautiful townhouse that's active right now, actually. Increase in price point, 3.6%. And then Kitsilano down 1.7% with 11 sales. So other than Fairview and Kits, there hasn't been a lot of transacting elsewhere. Obviously, Kitsilano and Fairview, very popular areas to live in. My next video I'm going to do is an area highlight of Fairview specifically. So not surprising to see that these are transacting here. But again, 295 inventory, just to 38 sales, a lot of selection out there. And then coming here on pricing, right? Despite buyer market conditions, you can actually see on the detached charts here that, they started to have a couple months of increase in price point, but it has essentially been yo-yoing since this mark here in 2023. The highs on Vancouver's west side, you have to go back to 2017, and it's been pretty much a flat line, until this marker for the last 4 years. But there hasn't been a huge price drop. We had this little bit of a drop here. It recovered nicely. Anyone who was able to operate down in this valley here was able to get in at a good position. And then look at here again, we are almost at all-time highs in the townhouse market, despite all the selection, despite sales are going down. And look how flat this condo line has been. I mean, on the west side, it's been flat for 7 years. So eventually, things are going to break out. I know that when people buy real estate, they just thought, these charts were going to continue to go on a bull run. And that's just not the case. There's such a lot of instability in that marketplace. But at some point, you're going to start to see some gains. And I know I referenced this already, but I do think that's probably going to be in like 3 to 4 to 5 year time. We're starting to see a lot of charts coming out from the banks who are predicting when we're going to see, finally a breakout with some appreciation. But as a buyer right now, this is where you're wanting to operate. We never know how long these conditions last for. I mean, keep in mind, look at this as a prime example. It's falling. This is only for a couple months here, and then it starts to heat right back up, and you're buying in a pretty more competitive situations. So it can change quite quickly. These drops don't peter out for too long. You had a moment here that was about a year and a half or so where it flatlined here. But when you look at the history of the valleys here, they don't last too long in terms of being able to jump into those positions. So overall, I think if you're a buyer, reach out to me. Let's have a consultation. Book that discovery call. My information's in the description below, and we can go over some of these numbers in further detail. So this is your update for April. And if you have any questions, reach out to me. Have a great week.